Hello and welcome everyone to Being Messianic. My name is Gail, and this class and discussion is about learning about our Hebrew roots in our faith. Recently, we've been looking at all of the prophets and the minor and the major prophets in the Torah and in the Bible. And today we're going to be looking at the judges. We're going in slightly different direction, but looking about what a judge was and what it meant. Because in the Hebrew Bible, there are typically 12 primary judges. There are more, and these are recognized in the book of Judges. However, you can, it depends on how you're categorizing them. Because certain people like Eli and Samuel, you can also say that there's 14. But the biggest thing about judges is, and it's not like what we think of a judge in the modern sense, in the legal way. These are military leaders and tribal deliverers who rose to power during times of crisis. So for them, a judge was somebody who is putting judgment upon the people and other people. So there is a big difference for us in the way we think about the word. And as I said, in the book of Judges, there are 12 major ones. I did notice that it says ox goad, but it really was an ox head. He did kill them with an ox. So there you can see that all of the different ones. And what's interesting is there is the one female judge in here. So there are quite a few. And remember, this is the standard list, and there are more as I mentioned, that can be considered. There are three other ones in particular that can be considered. Where Eli was a high priest and a judge, he was considered basically the ultimate type judge. And we know Samuel was a prophet, and he transitioned the nation from the era of judges to the era of kings. He anointed Saul, and later he anointed David. And then we have Gideon's son. Now, he declared himself a king rather than a judge, but most scholars will put him in the chronological time of that period because of the way he is. So if you strictly follow the book of Judges, the count is 12. But if you transition, it can be 14 to 15, somewhere in there. So there is a little bit of difference when we look at the judges and how they are considered. So where do you find them in the Bible? As I said, in the book of Judges is where we find most all of them. And you can see there's different breaking, and it's all of them, how they're broken down into it. And as I said in Samuel, the book of Samuel, there are the ones that are the additional judges. So you can see that this is in chronological order, starting over from left here and then going up to Tola, and then you go on down to Samson. And then, as I said, there was the transition. In Samuel, we transition where there's now a different way of looking at judges. So you can be a high priest and a judge at this point. And you remember, and I said, Samuel, he's our last judge, and he's the first of the great prophets. So there is a transition in the timeline. And you can see them in different scriptures. Also in Hebrew 11:32, there's the Hall of Faith, and these are some of the ones that are named, and they are listed together in the New Testament. And as you look at it, it breaks down. I went ahead and put the scriptures on here and about how long they were there, how long of a leadership period they were in there. So some of them were in for a long time and some for a short time. And it really varied on each one of them. So after the 12, then remember I said that it switched to priesthood and to monarchy. So this is when you start really getting the prophets and where you start getting this. And you'll notice in the timeline, very often there'll be an overlap. So as they transition, and it's not just this, but if you look at other things in the history, there could be people that have dual roles and they overlap. So when we saw the prophets, we kind of saw that too, where there was a little bit of overlap as they're transitioning into a new phase. And one of the things, and keep in mind, many of these judges were local heroes rather than national ones. The judges usually rose to power from a specific tribe that was being oppressed at the time, and we're going to go into that. And you'll notice that many of them are overlaps also because of where they were located. So you could have, and just as we saw in the prophets, during the time of Ezekiel and Daniel, you also had Jeremiah, but Jeremiah was in Israel, and Daniel was in the Babylonian court, and Ezekiel was actually a priest that was living by the riverside and was also captive from in Babylon. So there is quite a difference in how you'll see them and the overlaps that they have. But they did come from different tribes, and some of them we know, most all of them we know, but one of them, Shamgar, we do not know for sure which one he came from. But the rest of them, the scriptures tell us where they came from. So we have a little bit of history about them and why they were important and to which tribe they were coming from, and why they may. When you read the book of Judges, that kind of helps you also knowing where they were to help figure out what they were doing. Most of them came from the central and northern tribes, like Manasseh and Ephraim, which were Joseph's sons. And then there was on the east side, you have two of them that represented the tribes living on the east of Jordan in Gilead. And their leadership was crucial because these territories were very isolated from the rest of Israel and were frequently attacked from their enemies, the Ammonites. And then you have the Samson connection. He came from the time of Dan, and Dan was located on the coast directly next to the Philistines. And so there was this constant friction in Samson's time where there was border wars where the tribe of Dan, they were experiencing these. And then you also know that there's a priestly line where Eli and Samuel are unique because their leadership was tied to their religious roles. So they are very different in that respect. Samuel was born into the tribe of Levi, the priestly tribe, but lived in the territory of Ephraim. So it's kind of an interesting way of capturing that. But as I said, there's one that was a female, and Deborah is very unique in that respect. Um, she's one of the most multifaceted figures in the Old Testament. She's the only woman among the 12 judges, and her story, which is found in Judges 4 and 5, makes her really distinguishes her a leader who operated with a unique combination of legal, prophetic, and military authority. She was a very strong woman. So most judges were primarily military deliverers who rose to power during wartime, but she actually held three very distinct roles. She was a prophetess. She was one of the few women in the Hebrew Bible specifically given this title. Miriam and Huldah were the other two that had it. Miriam was the sister of Moses. So she had a very direct and spiritual connection and often spoke for God because she was a prophet. She was also a judge. And as I said, most of the time judges were a military leader where they won a battle. She was already functioning as a judicial leader. People would come to her to settle disputes with the palm of Deborah in the hill of the country of Ephraim. People actually came to her for advice and said, I need help. And then in Judges 5, there's a song. She's referred to as the mother in Israel. She refers to herself by this title, and it suggests that there was the nurturing, protecting, and unifying the fractured tribes. So there is quite a bit of difference. She also had a battle. And that was the battle against Jabin. Now, at the time of her leadership, Israel had been oppressed for about 20 years by Jabin, who was a Canaanite king who had 900 iron chariots. So these were iron chariots that everybody else had wooden. So they were considered like a tank in our day. These were powerful. You couldn't go against them. So she did something unusual. She summoned the commander Barak and told him God commanded him to take 10,000 men to Mount Tabor. But there was a condition. He famously refused to go unless she went with him because she was a prophetess and he knew that she spoke to God. He wouldn't do it unless she went with him. So this woman goes to battle. She agreed, but she prophesied the glory of victory would not go to him, but to a woman. And everybody thought at the time that it was her that they were referring to, but it wasn't. So then the strategy suggests that her timing was brilliant. She waited for the rainy season. And when the Kishon River flooded, to see how God works these things out, and it turned the plain into marsh. So those 900 heavy iron chariots were a liability instead of being a tank, they were stuck in the mud. And so this allowed the lighter Israelite infantry to overwhelm them and to take control. Now, the fulfilled prophecy, the woman that she talked about, it wasn't herself, but it was Jael. And that's so interesting because when the Canaanite general Sisera fled the battlefield on foot, he hid in Jael's tent. And while she slept, she had given him wine and fed him and made this nice feast for him. And he got drunk and fell asleep. And so she killed him with a tent peg, and that ended the war. And so the battle actually went to a woman. And then we have the Song of Deborah in Judges 5. So she actually composed a poem known as her song. And it's considered by historians to be one of the oldest passages in the entire Bible. And it's a rare, archaic glimpse into the tribal dynamics of the early Israel. The honor roll, she praises the tribes that showed up to fight and harshly criticizes those that stayed home, like Reuben and Dan. And also showing her role as a national conscience because she was a prophetess. And so she was actually being she judged them for not showing up because all the others showed up. And why didn't you guys show up? Why are you not here? And she's considered very great because of her leadership style. She was a collaborative leadership. She didn't seek to do it all herself. She empowered Barak to lead the army while she provided the vision and the spiritual backing to relying on the Lord and speaking for the Lord. And she defied the cultural norms. Women did not go to battle in that way. So this was a patriarchal society. Her authority was so absolute that a high-ranking military general wouldn't even go into battle or do anything until she told him what to do. That's how she was revered, or not revered, but how she was looked at the time. She had wisdom over might. While Samson, we were going to get into him today, he relied on his muscles. He was strong, and that's how he did it. She relied on discernment and listening to both God and the people and going with only what the Lord told her to do. So that's why she is so special, because she had a close relationship to the Lord and really listened to what he was telling her and would change direction as needed by listening to the Lord. So she wasn't perfect. She recognized she wasn't perfect, but she listened to what the Lord told her to do. So some others, we have Gideon and we have Ehud. Ehud's also the left-handed person, which is kind of an unusual one because everybody fought with their right hand, but he was left-handed. And we have Jephthah was the outcast, and we're going to get into him a little bit. He made a rash vow that if you give me this battle, the first one that comes through the door, I'm going to sacrifice. It was his own daughter. And of course, we have Samson, which many of us have heard of before because of his Nazirite vows that were given to his mother. And he had this flaws, revenge. His story is so, just come and go. And he fell in love with Delilah. And then he had his final act of vengeance was pushing down the temple of Dagon. And then Shamgar. He's got a one verse wonders. He's a very interesting one as well, because in each one of these, there's something different about him. For Gideon, he was very reluctant. Probably for me, I think he's probably one of the most relatables because he starts with this insecurity, and he's a sign seeker. He's famous for putting on a fleece to test God, not once but twice. And then he had this move that defies the physical military logic. The Lord tells him to whittle his army down from 32,000 to just 300 men. And the Lord tells him this, you only need 300 men. Do not take the whole army with you. So he does what the Lord tells him. So despite his great victory, his story still ends on a cautionary note when he creates a golden ephod that becomes an idol for his people. He created this instead of following God. So even though he'd been following God, he turns around and he still has this tale of warning at the end of like, just because you have success and glory, you have to keep remembering. And it's harder sometimes for people that have had a lot of successes, a lot of power, a lot of things going their way. Sometimes it's very hard for them to remember that it was God that gave it to them. And there's that slippage there for him. And then Ahud, as I said, he was interesting because if you're looking for more of a spy thriller kind of thing, he is a great choice for that because being left-handed, he had this tactical advantage because guards checked their left thigh for weapons, but he hid his short sword on the right thigh. So when they checked for him, they never checked his right thigh, and he was left-handed. So he gained a private audience with the morbidly obese King Eglon, I think it is, of Moab, claiming to have a secret message from God. And it ended up being one of the more graphic scenes in the Bible, how he became an assassin during this time. He snuck in and did that. And then our next one, Jephthah. Um, as I said, that is such a sad story. He had such a tough life starting out, and yet he still followed what the Lord was telling him to do. He'd been the son of a prostitute and had been driven out by his brothers, only to be begged to return when the tribe of Manasseh needed a general because by then he was revered as being a general. But he did not have a good upbringing, so they did not allow him in at first. And again, he had such a rash vow that he ended up having his daughter have to be assassinated because he turned around and said, the first one that walks through the door, I'm going to have them sacrificed to you. And then, as I said, Samson, we know a lot about him, about being the one. He had a Nazarite vow where he couldn't cut his hair. He was tied to a set of spiritual commitments: no wine, no touching dead things, no cutting his hair. He repeatedly broke all these vows. And remember, I've talked about in the past that a Nazarite, if you do the vows, you have to go to the temple and you have to ask the vows to be removed. He did not do any of those things. And so he did not come to the greatest of end. And when he had the final act of vengeance, he asked for strength one last time. And that's when he destroyed his enemies. And this one, Shamgar, it's interesting because there's little said. He's he's so interestingly precise because he says so little bit. And one of the things he saved Israel by killing 600 Philistines. And actually, I looked back in my notes, and I thought it was an ox head, but it's actually an ox goad, which is a long stick used to poke cattle. So that was the correct word. I thought it wasn't, but it was. He represents the idea you don't need elite status or traditional weapons to make a significant impact. And like I said, he was very, very simple in what he tells about us. It tells about any of that. So each one of them is a little different. You can use Deborah used her leadership roles in working with others. Gideon had to overcome his fear and trust God using God's math. And being told to get rid of your whole army and whittle it down to 300. And you really have to trust the Lord to do that. Samson is the difference between physical ability and moral integrity. And then again, when we look at our last one, Ahud, we're looking at unique traits, and God can use those. God gives you those traits for a reason. You may think, probably all through his life, he probably would have been looked down on for being left-handed because you needed to be right-handed for many things then. And communal food, different things like that. You would have needed to be right-handed, and he probably was looked down, and yet God used that. So we have to think about how God uses all of the things he's given us. And when you think about the leadership, there's not just one leadership style, just like as we looked at the prophets, there wasn't just one type of prophecies or one way of being a prophet. There's a very different uniqueness because you have Deborah, who's very collaborative. She empowers other people. She was willing to share the spotlight. She wasn't willing to just be just hers. She was a great leader that knew how to delegate tactical execution while maintaining her strategic vision by listening to the Lord. And then sometimes you have a reluctant leader, such as Gideon, and sometimes you have more of this lone wolf kind of person who's Samson, who he is a real good example of individualistic leadership. And it became a failure in his case because he never actually won a big battle. He never did anything. He always tried to do it on his own instead of following the vows that that God had for him. He didn't do this and became indecisive and secure, or there came a total lack of accountability for him. So each one of them has a very different style of leadership. And like Ehud, he knew that Israel couldn't stand a head-to-head war, so he used surprise and unconventional tactics. Deborah also used unconventional tactics. So you can see that each one of them was a leader, but they were very, very different in the way they handled things. One of the other aspects about the judges is that there was a cycle of the way they did it. There would be this sin, and we're going to be looking at the word serve today. And people would forget how their Hebrew roots, and they would be warned by the prophets and by the judges that you've got to turn back. You've got to do what God tells you to do. And they would not. And that's where Israel would get into so much trouble because they would be worshiping to other gods. Then, as a consequence, they would fall into this servitude under foreign oppressors. We even saw that in Jesus' time, where you have the Roman army who's doing this. It's this whole cycle where it's spinning around and around like a spinning wheel. You have this time, then they start becoming repentant because they're under bondage. Maybe it's in Egypt, maybe it's in Israel, but they're under bondage. Maybe it's in Babylon, and then there's this distress. The people are crying out to God, and they're asking, "Lord, come save us." Then the Lord saves them. So he raises up a judge to deliver them. And then there's this period of rest, and the land is at rest as long as the judge lives. But then as soon as the judge dies, very often the cycle would start over again. So it would become a cycle of going back and forth and back and forth. And, we see that even today. And when you look at the New Testament, you see that, and we'll see that with the book of Revelations, of how there's these cycles of things. And things, if you aren't listening to God, they will in not serving him, and you fall away, then there is consequences. So I always like to talk about different types of food. So when we have Jael, we know that with Jael there was a fruit platter, and we know that there was he asked for water, but she gave him curdled milk, so it's some form of yogurt, and was put in a lordly bowl. So Laban is a strained yogurt dip, which is served with olives and chickpeas. You can often pair it with sliced cucumbers, radishes, and pita bread. So it actually represents something they might have had at that time. It's a really soft cheese, which is served as a dip, just like hummus. And it's served not just in Israel, but through the Middle East. And often it's served as breakfast. It's very cool. It's similar to like a goat cheese, and it has a rich, tangy flavor. So it's really easy to make if you want to try it. It is kosher, and it is very tasty. You can also spread it on any plate and pile it with vegetables or grain, any way you want to do it. One of the other things that I did want to talk about on food items is Samson. Samson, I love the story of Samson. He does kill a lion, and he comes back later on, and he finds that there's honey in it. And he goes and eats the honey. So a lot of times when people are honoring, or not honoring, but remembering the story of Samson, they will turn around and have like apple slice and honey, as we do on Rosh Hashanah, or another sweet dish like baklava. So if you've ever had that, I would suggest trying that, because those are good as well. But a lot of times when people study the story of Judges, they have honey. Another interesting story about honey, and I heard this a long time ago, that back in the day, long time ago, when they were trying to teach the alphabet, teaching or Hebrew studies or Torah studies to children, they would actually take a drop of honey and put it on the chalkboard, the tablet that they were holding, and they would get to lick it, so that they had, as they studied the Torah, they would have the sweet taste of honey, the sweetness of the Torah, and it would implant into their head that there is this sweetness of learning the Torah. I don't know how often that common that was, but I do know that that is something that I have read about on many different occasions, and I was told about when I was taking a conversion class years ago. As I said, we're going to be looking at servitude today. We've been looking at different words, and we'll continue to do that throughout the year. And we're going to be hitting some of the power words in the Torah, so that there's 20 power words, and then there's more that we'll look at as well eventually. Of if you can read those words, you can read most of the Torah. And that's the Torah, not the whole Hebrew Bible, but the Torah. So this particular one, it fits really well. And you can see there are several ones that I was kind of looking at to serve, servitude, and the role of the servant. And these all served. And this particular word, it actually is in the Torah, or in the Torah, over 400 times. And you see it very commonly in the book of Judges, and that's why I thought it was a really good one for that reason. The word is used to describe Israel's physical servitude or slavery under foreign oppressions often. In the Hebrew context, being Aved is a slave servant to an idol or king was the direct result of turning away from their covenant. There's also the goal of service. There's the ultimate goal of deliverance, which we talked about, that the Israel would plead for forgiveness and be delivered, and be returning to being a servant to the Lord. So there's also this aspect of the word. So one of the things about it, and the reason I like this word, aved, is because aved with servitude, it really fits into Judges, especially when we look at Judges 2:7. So this one, we're looking at it, the word in action, though. And we've talked about how you have the root word and you turn around and add to it to make a little bit. So you have aved, which is where you can see right here is the root of it, and then to serve, the people served. And here you have va Ya'avdu. So you have served, the people served, and that's how we get the root words. So as you learn some of the root words, you'll have the ability to learn the aspects of those, and it will help as you're studying those things. So this is kind of a shorter lesson today because, like I said, the judges are a little bit different. So I thought that I'd open it up to discussion and answer any questions about. We can go back to the prophets, we can go back to the judges, and talk about those aspects. Anyone have any questions or comments? Wow, quiet group today. Okay, anybody have any questions? And just in general, you'd like me to answer about the Messianic faith or being Jewish? I will answer them if I can. Marion, you have a question?
No, I just wanted to say about Deborah. It was very interesting to hear all these details about her because you don't hear about her in the pulpit, or you don't hear about her as in a regular sermon or anything. But you went in really deep detailed about her, and it was very good to hear that that really dismantles the idea that a lot of churches have that women are not in the pulpit. But to see Deborah as judge and as military leader, prophetess, this is just really amazing. And I really like this that this woman is being brought forth and that women are used of God mightily. Thank you.
You make a really good point with that because even in the Jewish faith, there are fractions that don't believe in letting the women. They will separate the women from the men, and there is some reasons for that and some scriptural references to why they do some of those things. But women actually served a lot of functions. And no, they were never mentioned as many times in the Torah or in the Hebrew Bible itself and any of the other Talmud, any of the other writings. But they actually, there were many stories where they played a big function. We also, when we look back at the lineage of the Messiah, we also have even the lineage of David, because Jesus came from the line of David. But even in the line of David, you can see where the Bible mentions Ruth is one of them, Ruth and Boaz. You have several different women who are mentioned that are in that line. So there's a lot of important things that they did. It's just sometimes a lot of the teachings, you're right, we'll leave them out. And I don't believe God does that. God can use anyone, and it doesn't matter if it's a male or female. He uses both, and he uses those that are moving close to him. I think there's a lot of times that women could be probably do more than what they get the recognition for, but that could also happen with men too. Shelley, you have your hand up.
Yeah, along the same lines of that. I went back whenever you mentioned Judges 5, where the Song of Deborah was, and was skimming because I'm going to read it a little bit more later, when the class is not in session. But what I love about this is that from the very beginning in verse 3, she says, "Hear, O kings, listen, O rulers, I sing to the Lord. I will sing praises to the Lord, the God of Israel." So from the very beginning, all the accolades go to the Lord. And then bless the Lord, she's talking about God. It's like, awake, awake, sing a song. And then she goes down and talks about the lady. I'm trying to remember. I'm not quite down there yet. What was her name that did the tent peg in the head? Jael.
J Jail was the judge.
Jael.
So yeah,
Jael. Yeah,
Jail was the not judge, but the
the woman.
person. The woman's name. Oh gosh, I got.
Jael. I'm in
Yeah.
the judges in the
I
Bible.
even said it. Isn't that funny? I said it.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, it's jail. You're right. It is jail.
Jael.
Jail is the
And
cannot woman.
yes, and what's amazing in here, they give, they're talking about her, about how she struck his head, etc. And so that's two women that were given, that shows how the Lord used these two women. So I love that. And I loved how Deborah gave all the glory to in this song to God. In the beginning, she'll sing to the Lord and sing praises to the Lord. So even though she did these wonderful things, she knows that it was God that did these wonderful things. So I'm looking forward to going and reading it a little bit better. Thanks.
Well, it also reminds me of Miriam, who also was a prophetess and also did a song. And we have the recording, we have it recorded in scriptures of her song that she sang, she and the people sing. So it's interesting how they gave a song of praise and they gave all the glory to the Lord. And there's such a difference because, you know, Samson is a good example where he was trying to be, he was doing it all on his own. And look what happened to him because he wasn't following the vows he had taken and that his family had taken for him. He wasn't doing what the Lord said and he didn't give the glory to the Lord. And yet the Lord still used him in the end when he begged. So it is fascinating when you look at that aspect of it. And there are a lot, like I said, there are a lot of women in the Bible that we don't really study that much. So I would encourage everyone. Deborah's a very interesting woman. I think she's one of the most interesting because of, like I said, her dual identity. She did many different things, and then the way they thought of her at the time, where they wouldn't even, you have a military general who's over these huge army, and he's like, nope, I'm not even going unless she's going with me. And how amazing is that? What a wonderful story and testimony to the fact that she followed the Lord so much and they could see her connection with the Lord that and it's like, nope, we got to do what she's telling us. So that I love that story. That's a really good one from I've always thought. Any other comments about women? Mary, you have your hand up?
Yes, I was thinking back when I first got saved and I had read the story about Gail who uh, rammed the pig through the man's head. I thought that was so gruesome. And then you read this in the Bible, and I was saying it was really kind of gruesome for me when I first read it. But hey, she had to do what she had to do, to save her people. So I was just thinking about.
There's a lot of gruesome stories in the Bible when you really get down to it. But is that not the same in life today? When we look at the news and look at different things going on, there's a lot of gruesome things that go on. But yes, it is. There also has to be a little bit of fear that she was willing to do that, because when she did that, he could have woke up at any point when she was getting ready to do it, and he would have killed her. The other aspect is that he had if I remember, he had a very small group, and it could have gone poorly for her, and yet she still risked her life to do the right thing, because she had the opportunity and she took it. So it is an amazing story. I did get a question, and it's a good one. So we talked about the left-handed judge, and I know, and there's a good question about this, because I know that when I was a kid, I have some of my family are left-handed, and it was kind of looked upon. And when I was a kid, I started out using my left hand, and my grandmother would always make me use my right hand. Sometimes even now, because of that, I use my right hand. I am right-handed. But if people throw something to me, I don't even think about it. And sometimes I'll use my left hand to catch it. But I am right-handed, and I don't write well with either hand, so it doesn't matter. But the question was it looked down upon? And was it negativity originated from the Bible? First off, I know that there's also custom, and I'm going to jump into the Bible part of it. But there is customs about it. So in ancient times, very often they would have communal food pots. And it was always you ate with your right hand, and then you used the restroom with your left hand. And that way, in case you didn't have water, you would never you wouldn't have this uncleanness while you're trying to eat with a group of people. And what they would do is, if you turned around and you were caught thieving or anything like that, a lot of cultures would cut off your right hand, and then you could never eat in the communal pot again, because they would never let you eat with that hand. So there is part of that that's also a more of a cultural norm at the time. So keep that in mind. And was there anything in the Torah? So while we were talking, I had to do that. Yeah, and there's several people that are saying that they're left-handed. Okay. So I'm going to read something I found really quick, and I haven't had a chance to totally check it out. So I'm just going to read it to you, and we will look at it and take it with an open hand and open left hand until we know better. Okay, so in the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, the left-handedness is a fascinating nuance. While there isn't a negative issue in the sense of a moral failing or sin, the text definitely reflects a strong cultural and linguistic preference for the right hand, just as I was telling you. So here's a breakdown for the left hand in the Bible. The right bias, the linguistic part of it. In Hebrew, the word for right, yemen, is often synonymous with strength, skill, and divine favor. The right hand represents God's power. In your right hand, though, Lord, is glorious in power, in Exodus 15:6. The left hand can often be referred to, Shmuel, is carrying less prestige in later mystical traditions, was associated with judgment and concealment. However, being left-handed was never categorized as a blemish that would disqualify someone from being a priesthood in Leviticus 21, which is a significant indicator it wasn't viewed as a physical defect. Left-handed heroes. So the Bible does specifically mention left-handed heroes. For example, when we just talked about the judge, he's described as being left-handed, a man literally restricted in his right hand, which most scholars interpret as being left-handed. Some people think maybe, as I'm reading this, it's talking about, some people think there was a possibility that maybe he had something wrong with his right hand, so he might have been paralyzed or something like that. And in this case, there was an advantage because he was left-handed. He was able to hide a double-edged sword in his right thigh. The guards typically search the left thigh where the right-handed person keeps their weapon, and allows him to assassinate the king and thus liberate Israel. And then the tribe of Benjamin. The tribe of Benjamin, ironically, Benjamin means the son of the right hand. They were famous for having an elite unit of 700 left-handed warriors. Okay, I didn't know that. And this is in Judges 20:16. Among all the people, there were 700 select men who were left-handed. Everyone could sling a stone at a hair's breadth and not miss. And again, there isn't a prohibition against, but the culture definitely, and this is the Israelite culture, favors the right side. When Jacob blessed his grandson, Joseph tries to move Jacob's right hand to bless the older son, signaling the right hand covering the primary blessing in Genesis 48. And then in sacrifice of the tabernacle and temple, many rituals like dabbing blood on the ear or thumb specifically required the use of the right hand or the right side of the body. So there isn't a scriptural, this has to be this way, but this is part of that. And keep in mind, this is this is what the Jews believe on this. So the right hand represents power and overt blessing. Left-handedness was seen as a strategic advantage in combat, and there was no prohibitive or negative commandment against being left-handed. It didn't matter in that respect. But right-handed actions were standardized for temple service. So for those that were left-handed, they weren't excluded from temple service, but it did mean that they had to handle it in different ways. So the negative aspect is largely a matter of being normativity. I'm not sure I'm saying that right. The world was built for right-handed majority, but the text itself uses left-handedness as a mark of men of action or a clever savior. So that's interesting that no, there wasn't. So that's a very good question. I did not know the answer. Again, I haven't verified. That's just one passage that I found, or one article that I found really quickly. So if you want to look at it more, I would suggest you do that. But that's what I found very quickly on the internet. Okay. Oh, and this is a good comment that's in the chat. So many of these, so we're talking about so many of the judges, remind me of where it is written, not by might nor by power, but my spirit, especially Samson, Deborah, and Gideon. Yeah, I would agree with that. It's definitely how the Lord used them, and remembering that the Lord can use any one of us and use us in any way. So it's a good comment. Anybody else have anything they wanted to share or have a question? I have to say, I learned something about being left-handed. Okay, so I told people this at the beginning, and I wasn't sure I'd have time to share it, but I had said that in the series where we just finished all of the prophets, and we've now finished the judges, and I had planned next week to go to talk about the Pharisees, Sadducees, and the scribes. However, we're going to be switching gears slightly. And next week, we're actually going to be discussing the Trinity from the Jewish perspective. Just in a nutshell, the way Christianity, mainstream Christianity looks at the Trinity, you will often hear that Jews do not believe in it and that is true. But there are some things in the background that about what they do believe and how they believe in the three parts that we call the Trinity. They don't call it the Trinity, but we're going to look at the three distinct aspects and how the Hebrew scriptures apply to those. So it'll be interesting, and I hope you join because it is a little bit different than what we normally think of. And I'm just going to tell you that there are scriptures as you know, there are many scriptures that talk about the Messiah. So keep that in mind as we get into that topic. There are many scriptures. There are over 300 that I'm aware of. There may even be more, but there are over 300 scriptures that I have seen and listed out before in a table where there's a prophecy about Jesus, about the Messiah, Yeshua. So keep that in mind, that they do recognize that there is a Messiah, but they didn't recognize that Jesus was the Messiah. So next week we're going to be looking at that aspect, and I hope you join me, and please bring questions, and we can kind of talk about the aspects of this, because that's a very deep topic. And then we're going to be getting ready towards going into Purim, which we're going to be talking about a woman again. We're going to be talking about Esther, Mordecai, and Haman for Purim. So we will be talking about the role that a woman played in the Jewish faith, in the Jewish history, and how Purim celebrates what she did and celebrates what the Lord did. I mean, especially what the Lord did. But she played a role in this. And so it's great to see how she did that. So we'll be discussing that. That'll be coming up very soon. And then in about a month is actually Passover, and we'll be looking at that as well. It's a little over a month, but we'll be looking at that as well. So be sure to bring your questions, and we can start talking about all of those things. And if you have other questions, you can message me and tell me, and I'll try to put them on the list of things to go over. Okay. Any last questions today about any of that I just talked about?
Gail, I wanted to say one more thing, which I thought was interesting. When you were talking about the songs, the Song of Deborah, the Song of Miriam, I remember too, Mary had a song. So that's pretty interesting. Just wanted to throw that in there. Thanks.
Actually, you're right. I forgot about that. She did.
Yeah. Pretty interesting. I didn't think about the songs. I didn't even think about Miriam, but then I'm like, yes, Mary had a song too. That is so neat. Thanks.
Okay, I'm looking this up real quick. Hold on. How many women had songs in the Bible? How many women? So that's an interesting. Yeah, Samuel's mom. See, there's another one there. Song of the Sea, we know in Exodus 15, sung by Moses and his sister's the one. Song of Miriam in Exodus 15:21. The Song of Deborah, which we talked about in Judges 5. The Song of Hannah, that's what you were saying. And First Samuel chapter 2. It's a prayer book of thanks, so poetic it's considered as a song and served as a template for Mary's song in the New Testament. Let's see. Mary's song. There's Zechariah's song, Simon's song. Oh, that's true. I didn't even know Zechariah had a song in Luke 1 about the birth of John the Baptist and when he was born. And then Simeon's song in Luke 2 when Simeon sees the infant Jesus. And this Song of Revelation. There's heavenly songs, of course. So, that was really cool. I thank you for sharing that. I hadn't even thought about Samuel's mom also having a song, but there's quite a few. And of course, the Book of Psalms is full, and we don't always know who the author is on some of those. Some of them we know were David. I know there's one that is Solomon's, but I know, and then some were the musicians in their court, but there are some that we don't know who they're credited to. So good questions. Very good. Yes, when am I going to be discussing about Jesus in when I'm talking about the Trinity? Yes, but keep in mind, I'm also going to be really focusing on what the Jewish beliefs are on the different aspects that we call the Trinity. So yes, I will be talking about Jesus as the Word, but I'm going to be focusing on what Jews believe. So because that's what we're looking at, is what is the Jewish belief on that. And then we can kind of talk about what the Christian belief is as a counterpoint to it. So it'll be a good question. Good question on that. And I will be including that as well. So thank you for asking that. All right. One last time. Any other comments or questions before we leave for the day? Well, it was a good discussion. Thank you guys for asking all those questions and and having the comments and things. And that actually adds a lot to it, because I actually did not know about some of the different songs, and I did not know totally about the left-handedness. So those were really good questions, and thank you. And keep in mind, I have not totally researched those. So the first answer I found is what I shared. So always check that out and double check it because I have not had that opportunity to do that myself. But that's literally what I found when I first pulled it up. So thank you for that. All right. As I said, next week we'll be looking at the Trinities, and I hope you join. Throughout the week, we'll be having different things. Please be sure to check the calendar. As you've seen, uh, there's a lot of time changes on different meetings and some different meetings, some new meetings starting, some different things going on. So please check those things this week. And I hope to see you at some of the different meetings. And I definitely hope to see you at the Sabbath services. And I hope to see you again next Sunday on Being Messianic. So, shalom, everyone. We're going to close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for allowing us to have this time together and to learn about your people and learn about, oh, wow, learning about the judges and learning about some of the things that they did and so the different aspects of them. There's so many different nuances to it. And letting us hear and see the things that they did and how this impacted. There is so much impact that they had on the people. And we see this wonderful cycle. Well, not always wonderful, but the cycle of how and we do this today. We will sin against you, and then we cry out to you, and you hear us, and we come back to you. And you are so merciful that you are so patient with us. You're patient with in our lives when we have sinned against you and returned to you. And you have been patient with your people. And so thank you for that. We know there is a final judgment coming and that we should try to avoid sin at all cost and avoid any of those things. And you remind us of that. And you remind us of the consequences of some of your own people, like Samson, who turned away from you and he had not followed and done what you told him to do. What would his story have been like if he had? How great would it have been? There were so many missed opportunities there. It's a good reminder for us. So thank you for that. And yet you still had mercy on him to give him that one last bit of strength. His hair had grown out again, and you give him that one big burst of strength. It destroyed him, but he also was able to fulfill what he was supposed to have done early on in destroying his enemies. You use us in so many ways. And Lord, thank you for that. Thank you for all that you do. We thank you. And we're just reminded of how much we should praise you. The songs that we've heard today, the different songs of the different people, how wonderful is that? You are so mighty and glorious. And Lord, we ask that you take the sword of the Lord and sever soul ties, any connections that we may have formed with each other during this meeting, because we want to remain holy unto you and only unto you. We want to be aligned with just you. You are the one that deserves all the glory and majesty. Through you, all things are possible. And we thank you for that. In your precious, precious name. Amen. Well, everyone, shalom. And I hope you have a great week. And I hope you join us. Like I said, it'll be an interesting discussion, I think, next week. And I hope you come with questions and we will try to answer them. Shalom. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Gail. It was beautiful.
Praise God for that. Thank you for that. And we give all the glory to the Lord. Bye, everyone.